Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about how to teach your students a second language. In particular, we're going to be talking about Spanish. And Spanish is just a wonderful language to learn because Spanish is the second most spoken language worldwide and the United States. So it's going to open up a world of opportunities for your children, and they're going to be able to dive into literature, learn what other thinkers are expressing and writing about that was not translated into English. They're going to be able to visit about 20 countries that speak Spanish, dive into those cultures, and also it's going to give them an advantage in the workforce because bilingual speakers always have an advantage over monolingual because of the ever-growing Hispanic population here in the United States. And so we're going to talk about how to get your children to be fluent. And it's not just putting them in front of a little program 15-20 minutes a day. That's not going to get them into fluency. Being a fluent speaker is being able to understand at least 95% of what you're listening to and being able to engage in a conversation with someone. So let's dive into it. I have a lot of resources here that I want to share with you and how I help my children become fluent in Spanish and still helping them in their journey. And if you're a native speaker, you can relate to a lot of native speakers have the issue that their children understand everything, but they cannot speak it. So we're going to talk about that today and other things on how to learn Spanish and how to teach Spanish. So the first thing is to know how long is it going to take. So according to the Foreign Service Institute of FSI, it's going to take about 3 hours a day if you want your student to be fluent in 6 months. And it's going to take about 1 hour a day if you want it to take about 18 months to about 2 years. And so there gives you an idea of how long it takes. So I'm going to break up the content into 3 areas. There's learning the content of Spanish. There's auditory learning and developing an ear for Spanish. And then there's the speaking portion. And that is going to give you an overall picture of how to teach the language. So let's start off with content and how to teach content. So if you're not a native speaker, you want to get a language learning program, and there's many out there in the market. I particularly like Rosetta Stone because it is a program that the child is immersed in the language and there are no translation. It's just images and they're immersed in listening to the language. Their pronunciation is also tested and corrected in the language, and their grammar is also integrated into the program. So I highly recommend it as a good language learning program, and there's many different languages you can learn on there. So aside from that language learning program, you also want to use flashcards. I think flashcards are a good way on teaching content really fast. You can memorize a huge amount of information with flashcards. So I like to start off with flashcards such as like the words. Like here we have animals and just different things. We have people, animals, numbers, objects, foods. That's what we have here. Then we have verbs. So action verbs. When they get a little bit better, I start moving on to Spanish phrases. And then we move on to Spanish conjugation, conjugating those verbs. So for example, we have the word to live and vivo, vives, vive, vivimos, vivís, viven. So the conjugation of verbs is something that becomes problematic. So having these Spanish conjugation cards are great. I'm going to link all of the resources below. So also for the little ones, what I like to use is the Spanish learning folder. And so I have this little stand-up folder, and it has all the things that they need to learn to be able to master all of the basics in Spanish. So we have the alphabet, we have the letter sounds in Spanish, we have the numbers 1 through 10, numbers 1 through 30, we have body parts. So everything is in themes and is split up in themes like this. Then we have pets, we have clothing. So I have them point and repeat after me. And if you're not a native speaker, you can use Google Translator to be able to help you with pronunciation. We have family, we have days of the week, all of the basics. Stations of the year, we have the beach, the farm, just so much. The jungle, foods, fruits, and so on. So this folder, the Spanish learning folder, I'm going to link it below as well. It's just a great asset and is going to help your children learn all of the basics along with the flashcard. So now you have all of the content, and that is, again, a language learning program, the flashcards, a Spanish learning folder like the one that I showed you. Now let's move on to developing the year, because you can know the content, you can know everything that people are saying, but you may get confused when you hear people talk in a different way. You know, people can talk Spanish very fast. They can also talk Spanish in many different ways. So developing an ear for Spanish is very important. The first thing, if you're a native speaker, is to speak the language in your home as much as possible. And if you're speaking at least 3 hours a day, that's going to give your children a huge advantage. Here in my home, we speak Spanish after lunchtime. After we're done with all our schoolwork, all of our homeschooling, we're speaking Spanish, and I'm requiring them to speak back, and that's important for us. And we have a little chart for the little ones, and I have a little incentive chart where they're speaking 15 phrases a day and they're earning things for that. So it's just giving them little incentives. As they get older, like my oldest, she's already speaking to me because she wants to. And so if you're not a native speaker, you want to develop that ear with other things, such as maybe playing some movies in Spanish, cartoons in Spanish, music in Spanish. Getting them to really listen to the language is going to be very important. With the cartoons in Spanish, you'd be surprised. They will learn a lot, and you can get the streaming services to change the language, such as Netflix. You can change the language to Spanish, and they will be immersed into the language and learn it so quickly. I'll tell you a story. There's someone that I know that told me that their little one learned how to speak English just by watching cartoons, and it really shocked her. So she would have her watch cartoons in the morning. She was still at home. I think she was like 3 or 4 years old, and she would let her watch a few hours of cartoons a day. She took her to the park one day, and to her surprise, she started speaking English to the other kids in the park. Now, mind you, the mother does not know English, so this child learned how to speak the language solely by watching the cartoons hours a day. Now, I'm not proposing that you put your child in front of the cartoons hours a day to learn a language, but I just want to show you the power of really immersing the child into the language by having movies, cartoons, music. All of the things is going to really help them. Now let's talk about the speaking portion of it. So it's really important that you motivate your children to speak the language, because again, like I said, you can know the language and know what people are saying and know what things are called. But when it comes to speaking, you're really using a different part of your brain here. So there's no way around it. The best way to learn how to speak Spanish is by speaking it. And again, if you're a native speaker, it's requiring your children to speak back to you. And that practice of speaking the language is going to really be perfected. They have a lot of issues at first with the verbs and the tenses, so this is going to really help them. If you're not a native speaker, then it's, you know, hiring a tutor to come to your home, or maybe having a friend that speaks Spanish come and practice with your children. There's also local conversational groups that you can join, where it's just Spanish conversation groups, and your children can get to practice all of the things that they have learned at home. If you cannot find local conversation groups, you can join some online. One that I recommend is outschool.com. They have a lot of different classes on there. But one of the things that you can do is you can find Spanish conversational classes, and your kids could be speaking Spanish every day in a little virtual classroom with other students. Practicing every day or a few times a week is going to be really helpful. So I'll link that resource below as well. Another option, if you're a native speaker, is having them talk to their grandparents in Spanish. So I have my kids call their grandparents almost every night and talk to them in Spanish. Not only is it a joy to their grandparents to hear them, but also it's just great practice for them to practice those Spanish speaking skills and to become better at the conversation. If you have family members, just go and visit your family members and have them speak in Spanish. Also, you can visit restaurants. And you could visit Mexican restaurants and other Spanish restaurants and practice your Spanish speaking skills by ordering your meals in Spanish. There's just so many different ways on how to practice your speaking skills, but it is important that you're practicing every day or at least a few times a week so that you can get better at speaking. One thing that I also forgot to mention is reading in Spanish if you're a native speaker, and that is something that, again, helps to develop that ear again. And I have just different Spanish books that I read to my kids. Every morning I'm reading a different Spanish book to my kids. Fiction, non-fiction, just reading the book. If they don't understand something, they ask me and I will tell them what it means. And it just develops that ear and that language skill. Now let's talk about reading. So once your child has become good at learning the content, they develop an ear for Spanish, they're getting really good at their conversation. Now you can start introducing them to reading Spanish. And my favorite resource here is Fonética Elemental. And this is a book that's going to take your student from syllables to reading complete sentences. So it goes over the syllables, and then the child is going to start reading word lists with those syllables, and then they're going to be moving on to reading complete sentences. So I think it's a great book because it's just one book that you need to learn how to read Spanish. I'm going to link this resource below. I have my kids learning with that book right now and they're absolutely loving it. I hope that you have enjoyed this video on how to teach Spanish, and I hope you have gotten some ideas. Even if you're not teaching Spanish, these are just some ideas on how you can teach any language that you would like. Remember, first you start with the content, then you develop the ear, and lastly, you continue to work on that speaking portion of it. And it's just going to create this well-rounded, fluent speaker. Don't give up, incentivize your children, and just make it fun for them. I think they're going to love to be able to know a second language, and they're going to thank you for it later. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll link all of the resources below that I mentioned in the video with the flashcards, the different books, in the description box. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.